Welcome to Reptile Fight Club. I'm Justin Julander. With me, Rob Stone.
Ahoy, hoy.
Here for another week.
Indeed.
We haven't done a clip show in quite a while, so
More than a year.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was looking back and thought, man, that's a long time ago. I think the last one was the end of June in 2024. So I guess we've had plenty to talk about, plenty of people, good guests to have on. So, but yeah, we're going to go through the next 10, I guess, and from where we left off last year. So if you've been eagerly on the edge of your seats, I apologize for that, but so yeah. Well, what's going on in your world these days, Rob?
Oh, lots and little. No, nothing hugely notable to write home about, but excited for this. I think it's a cool idea, especially in the context of, right, it's not just playing clips from the show in that sort of clip show context.
Yeah.
It's talking through these things that, in this case, I mean, really, we're basically 3 years out from that first episode in the set that we're talking about. So I think that's really cool to try and bring some fresh perspective, and even tried to listen to as much as I could this week. And so there's little tidbits and things that are pretty fun. Kind of the time capsule piece is always good too. I appreciate that.
Right.
So I think it's a cool idea, and again, plenty of content, but I do think this is a cool idea, and we've maybe got to at least get to the outro. So
right. Yeah. Well, and these are all kind of the Chuck era shows too, back from 2022. So yeah, I think trying to see we're I think around August of 2022 with these shows. So guess if you're following along at home, and you can, I admittedly, I didn't go back and listen to all of them. I was trying to, I listened to parts of them just to kind of refresh my memory, what the topic was and what we were talking about and who was on and those kind of things. So, but I'll be definitely interested in hearing your take and some of the thoughts you had on these episodes as well. So, yep.
Yeah.
One of those things where, if you're listening at home, sometimes you might be yelling at your phone or whatever you're listening on. Talk about this or bring this topic up, So we'll give at least Rob the opportunity to do that. And I'll probably have some new thoughts as well, based on, who knows, maybe I'll go back to the good old thoughts that I had back then. But hopefully I've changed a little bit in the last 3 years, become more wise. Or yeah, probably not, but we'll pretend.
Yeah. There's sort of a theme to them too, in a way, at least. So when we get to it, just sort of an anecdote in the way that we all have interaction with an acquaintance of mine, that fits sort of the theme of 3 to 4 of these 10 episodes, which is, I just found interest. I'm going, oh, okay. So maybe you were in a certain headspace, kind of coming up with topics and things, or there was a lot in the news or whatever it was, but it's sort of,
or suggestions. Maybe people listening were like, hey, maybe, let's talk about this aspect. Yeah. So, I kind of noticed the same thing. So yeah, that's, common threads, I guess, permeate through a lot of different areas of herpetoculture. And I think, it is sometimes a little tricky to come up with new topics, although there's, endless things that we can chat about. And so, and back, it was, I guess, challenging some weeks to come up with a new topic or this or that. So yeah, it's interesting doing a podcast for sure, and I mean, I can see why a lot of them kind of go by the wayside rather quickly. It's kind of tricky to keep it going, keep it fresh, keep something coming out, I just, hats off to Eric and Owen for keeping it alive for so many years, and,
right. And even, having the foresight maybe to, I know this was, he and I were just texting about this, that, kind of the foresight to say, okay, if at some point it starts to fall off, which it does, even with professional podcasters, right? Their show after 15, 16 years, that, like he's did well to create the network and kind of, okay, so there's been a lot of Colubrid. There's been our show. hopefully, bows in the mix and things. So, or at least in the works. So, I think that was another really prescient moment on his part.
Right.
Of saying, okay, maybe he's getting super busy and stuff. And, that an outlet to continue to put out good content that, we all feel good about, was saying, hey, someone else pick up the torch. My arm's getting a little tired.
Right. Seriously. And I mean, Eric's work schedule is insane. I don't know how he does anything aside from just working, that's gotta be a hectic thing for him. So again, just hats off to Eric and the effort he goes to. Owen would admit Eric does the lion's share, I think. So we're not going to give Owen too many pats on the back, but he deserves a few as well. Yeah. Good job, Owen. Good job. So, yeah.
Where are my kudos?
I want my kudos. Things are good over here. Just feeding trials with Antaresia, and it can be a challenge sometimes, but they're doing okay. And the carpets, pretty much all the jungles have fed on their own, and most of them have taken rats, so that's exciting. And the inlands are starting to take food, and so good things happening. And hopefully the Antaresia will decide to follow suit, as well as the lone black-headed python. They can be very frustrating at times, but what do you do? Oh, and I got an egg from Nephurus asper, the prickly knobtail gecko. So that's my first. I did get a clutch last month that I missed, and so they were all sunken in. So I felt really bad about that, but caught it this time, and one egg was good. The other was a little dented, and I don't think it's going to make it. So we'll hope the one egg hatches, but it's kind of exciting to potentially have a new species hatch out this year. So that'll be fun. Such big eggs too for they're decent sized lizards, but the eggs seem disproportionately large. It's kind of crazy. So, yeah. And, I don't know what else. I'm going on to Chris Aplin's podcast tomorrow. His Monitor podcast that's on a different network. Maybe we won't know on the Trap Talk network. So that'll be fun to talk monitors. I think it's kind of tricky sometimes, but I don't know. I have lots of different interests. You get kind of pigeonholed sometimes. I always talk about Rico Walder, and everybody thought of him kind of towards the end as the green tree python guy, but he was like turtle guy and lots of different guys, his zoo career. And but I found out he just had a huge wealth of knowledge about turtles and was very fascinated and interested in turtles. And so I don't know. Don't tase me, bro. Don't pigeonhole me, bro. I think we all kind of have secret closet interests, or at least we should have, I won't even get into birds, but talking with Steve Sharp, he's getting into cactus pretty heavy, and started talking about all the cactus. And he's like, did you know Alan Rapace was one of the biggest succulent names in the world? He found some way to clone succulents and had this business, and it's man, that guy is incredible, some of the stuff he's done. So kind of cool. He had some rare specimens that nobody was able to clone, and he got them to clone out and was selling them for big bucks and stuff. So Alan's an entrepreneur, that's for sure, and a very smart guy. He gets things going. So but hopefully we'll have some snakes to sell here soon, and I think the jungles would be ready to go. So if anybody's looking for a nice looking jungle with a really cool head pattern, they've got some nice head stamps on them. So hit me up. Let's see.
Is your availability going to be posted on your website?
No, probably not. I doubt it. Shoot me a text and I'll send you pictures. It's kind of how I've started these days. I don't know. Yeah, the website thing is, I just need to figure out how to make AI do everything for me or something. There's probably a way. I'm too old for this. But
just too much going,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like one more thing to have to do and have to pose all the snakes and all that kind of stuff. But I guess I'll have to do it eventually. It's just taking the time then to put it on the website is just that extra step. And it's not very, I've made it not very user friendly. So I don't know, but yeah, I need to get some up, get the website updated. That'd be a good thing to do. Yeah. Excited to go herping here soon. And got some funding proposal for funding. So or request for a proposal for funding. So hopefully that means more funding is on the way and I won't have to start breeding rodents or something like that. Figure out some other day job that would not be enjoyable. So, but
right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's about it that's going on with me.
Okay.
Yeah. Should we dive in?
Yeah.
Let's get going on this. All right. The first topic that we're covering is the show with Miles Pickett. The topic was reptile shows. Are they still important or still viable? And seems like there's a no shortage of reptile shows. There's like a ton of different reptile shows. And I think, if you're local, I mean, Owen does a lot of local PA shows. I try to hit the Utah shows when I'm in town or when I, have animals to sell or whatever. And have a friend that I can vend with that kind of makes it easy that way. But, I've traveled to a few kind of distant shows right now. Daytona's going on right now. And
right now
it looks pretty cool. Like I just saw Ron St. Pierre posted a picture of like a booth full of albino blue tongues that he just posted. I'm like, that'd be pretty cool to see, they're knocking it out of the park. So it'd be fun to see all his stuff. But, and I do enjoy going to those shows. I think the last time I went to like a big show like Tinley was a couple of years ago to do a gecko symposium talk. And really, it's a great show. I mean, I really enjoy the show. But, I think in some ways we've kind of succumbed to the monoculture and it's like crested gecko, ball python, it's just kind of more of the same type stuff. And just, I don't know, I guess, that was probably my thoughts back then too. I'm kind of the old man, get off my lawn there, but all these damn ball pythons everywhere. Yeah. But I don't know, it kind of ebbs and flows. And I think people get into different projects and there's still breeders that do more niche stuff and which is kind of what I like. And so you're usually going to see something new and cool at the shows. There were some cool gecko species at the last Tinley and that I went to anyway. Yeah. So, and I'm sure there were some at the last Tinley that was held, but there's always going to be cool stuff, even if it's majority kind of the same, ball pythons and crested geckos. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, kind of in a similar spot. I think, save one local show that I went to meet Tom at for a handful of minutes or something. I don't think I've been to a reptile show at all since we stopped going to Tinley as sort of the NPR crew, which really came about associated with figuring out that overlapped in time with a good time to go to Australia.
Right.
So,
that's the hard thing.
It's been a while. And I think the other part of it that I have to admit is just sort of my own bias or perspective or where I'm at in terms of saying I'd rather, especially in sort of that apples to apples comparison of, going to look at animals in cups versus potentially going to see animals in the wild. Right. There wasn't a comparison between those two things.
Right,
and I think even where I'm at now, I can certainly appreciate a cool looking whatever it is or a novel, whatever it is. But, and I really appreciate sort of the context of getting to see people that otherwise I don't get the chance to see. It's really good. We talked about this relatively recently with Matt Wayne when he was on the show. And we were talking about in the context of like the utility of shows and symposia and things, in the age of podcasts, that sort of stuff. So I I think there's probably utility to them that I feel less now based on where I'm at. Certainly, I mean, if I went back 15 to 20 years, nothing better than going to a reptile show, even 10 years ago, you know?
Right.
So I think that appeal is there. It's probably where we're coming from in our own perspective of how we feel about not only, you know, animals in cups or whatever, but also our desire for those things, right? Part of it has been the desire to go find animals and not keep them in a box, so that seeing a bunch of animals in boxes, even if it's sort of it doesn't hold the same draw than it once did 25 years ago, of saying like, oh, that's the coolest thing ever in the context of wanting it in my house, you know?
Right.
Like, I'm not looking to add anything. So there's no, it could be anything. And I would be going, that's cool. You know?
Yeah. Like, so from that perspective, you might as well see it in the wild versus see it in a deli cup in a, you know, at a show. Yeah. It's much more fulfilling to see it in the wild for sure. And you know, there's no chance you're going to see it. There's no guarantee you're going to see it at a reptile show, especially these days where things are kind of getting less and less that way. Unless you go to New Caledonia, you might see some of the same things. Except they'll be tailless crested geckos. You know, they won't have a tail on them. But that would still be really cool to see crested gecko in the wild. I would love that.
I'm still trying to. I know there were a couple different podcasts that had folks on talking about sort of that concept of going to go and see them and things. And it sounded really cool. To be honest.
For sure. Beautiful place. I mean, it looks really fantastic just from a place to visit, you know, regardless if you find a gecko or not. And then the fact that there are new species being discovered like that. Speaking of the gecko symposium, they had a talk about that new Rhacodactylus type, you know, gecko that had webbed feet and could swim and stuff. And so they gave us a painting of it. Where did I put that? I gotta find that. But you know, we there's just really cool things to see out there, and I agree with you. I think other than, you know, I think you hit the nail on the head. Is like I mostly get excited about reptile shows in the context of who I get to see and talk to, and that's really kind of the draw for me these days. Is like, you know. And I guess I did get those Asper at the last Tinley, but we did leave for Australia shortly after that too. I think so. It was like I had to have him ship them to me, you know, later because I was going to Australia, and it was kind of funny because I was talking. Oh man, why did I start the sentence before I thought of the name? But gosh, I should know this. But anyway, gecko skink breeder breeds a lot of cool. Geckos. Gosh dang it. Anyway, it's not
Joe Hub.
He's Midwest guy. Anyway, it'll come to me down the road, but Tremper.
Phil Tremper.
Phil Tremper, yep. And we talking to him, and he had some captive bred blue tongues. The oh my gosh, Alpine blue tongues. And I was, you know, coincidentally going to Australia to hopefully look for those. And we actually found 3 of them. So it was, you know, kind of cool. And so I was sending him habitat shots and things like that, cool. You know, showing him like where we found them and stuff. So that was pretty fun to have that kind of tie in, I guess. And, but yeah, you're right. It was much more rewarding seeing them, you know, in a field in Australia than seeing them in the deli cup.
Them in the cup.
Yeah,
too.
for sure. But, or seeing them at, you know, Johnny's house and stuff, you know, just really awesome. But, seeing them in the wild is just that next level, I guess. And so I guess if you can't afford to go to Australia, you know, it's amazing to see the animals at all. Right. But I have found myself like being less excited to see him in captivity, you know, when I get the chance versus seeing him in the wild. And, you know, I don't know. I guess we kind of change our attitudes. And, you know, when I first started going to reptile shows, I was all in, you know, like it was the best thing in the world. So absolutely. But so I don't know. I think there's still, I mean, I guess I look at things like Tinley or Daytona as, shows for like true reptile nerds, the people who are looking for different things or looking to connect with friends and not really necessarily going going to sell animals, of course, but like there's a draw just to see rare stuff or to see hard to find stuff and to see people breeding cool things. Whereas like our local shows, maybe just like maybe for the public or to educate people or things like that, so there's different shows for different folks. Not that the locals don't go to Tinley, but like, it just seems like, people there are kind of focused on, getting really cool things or deals or, seeing their old friends, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I had wound up, Phil had texted me out of the blue Monday night when they were doing their Snakes and Stogies pre-Daytona show.
Oh, yeah.
Called me in, come in from the bullpen to help us out with our Reptile Show bingo card, and they're filling out all these problematic content items or whatever that, what do you think? What are we missing here? And that sort of stuff. So it's worth a listen at least before I come on. And so folks go check that out and see. But yeah, it was supposed to be all in good fun, and just sort of all the silly things that are more like the local show stuff. Although I think you could still probably fill it out at Daytona.
Right. Yeah.
You'll still be able to make it through. But
yeah. And so I guess to that point, sometimes the shenanigans or the idiocy that goes on, or, you have half dead animals at tables and stuff that we could do without that, I think. And the drama of the, battling herpetoculturalists or whatever is kind of silly. Yeah. All those. And I think it's kind of settled down to some extent, but there's still
you would hope
a bit of an element of it. Yeah. Probably not as, fist fighty as the 90s and 2000s, but it was a little funny. But I have some great memories at reptile shows. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I guess I'll take this one as the intro to the story I alluded to previously in terms of local acquaintance. Right, had gone to a local reptile show, and I heard him make a mention to somebody else. Oh, I'd gone to this reptile show. I had no idea he was interested in reptiles and whatever. And I just, in hearing the story, then it's like, well, he had gotten a 12-foot long retic. He, just going, and I don't know if he had previous snake experience, whatever, but just sort of as a pet,
impulse buy or something.
Impulse buy, and just sort of like, man, this thing's so cool, and it is. They are. Right? And so then the next day, it's, hey, show me a picture, what you got or whatever. So he shows me, and it's a golden child, which again speaks to the price difference now from 18 years ago and whatever. But just getting it as pure pet, and he's talking about, having it out, and it climbs up onto the furniture or the lamp or whatever it is, and it's just hanging out, and because they're cool, smart snakes, right?
Yeah.
And then today, I said I had thought about it last night, and because I remember when those were first born out. So the founder animal on those was a female Gempea that had come in. And it was sort of that same look, but it had this really cool sort of stripe right along the spine, patchy stripe right along the spine, in addition to just sort of that granite type, mono orange monotone color with the flecking and stuff. It also had this wacky yellow stripe going. And now I think Kevin must have gotten that animal in the early 2000s, certainly 2002 at the latest, and grew it up. And as I recall, those babies were born maybe end of 06 into beginning of 07, something like that. And they hatched out, and it was all these different looks, but I just remember being tremendously disappointed that none of them actually looked like that female that had, because that was what I thought was the coolest bit, is this sort of dorsal stripe that it had. But here's the thing that was actually cool, and there's morph topics we'll get into and whatever, but having that experience, knowing that background, and then having the Internet Archive at my disposal, today I was able to show them, I don't know what the filial generation is. I don't know the gap. This is like the great-grandmother or the great-great-grandmother of your snake in this picture. Absolutely it is, for darn sure. And he thought it was cool as heck and all that. So
that's cool.
I thought that was pretty neat, and it was only that it was a mutation, that I had the sort of awareness of that history, having seen it, kind of play out as it did, to be able to to do that. But that's a really cool. I thought that was really cool, and especially with someone who's just coming at it, from a public perspective, let's say, I think it totally blew his mind that I was like, this is either the great grandmother or the great great grandmother of that snake that you're so excited about.
Right. Oh, that's cool. And I you wish you could kind of bottle that feeling of your first reptile show or seeing that snake, that just captivated you at a show and thinking, I still remember the first time I saw Brettle's python, when they were juveniles, and I was just like awestruck, like, holy crap, this is so cool. I think it was at a Vegas reptile show and we were just passing through and I'm like, holy crap, there's a big reptile show here, can we go? And my parents took me and I got to stare at a Brettle's python, hold it, that kind of thing. And it was pretty cool. And then
this must have been years later, but Tom and I did a Vegas show once.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I'm trying to think when
this would put, certainly this would be post that timeline, but it's probably the same folks are doing the same. I think it was at it's the station, Palace Station or something.
Right.
It was off the strip somewhere. In one of those.
I'm thinking about it. I had to have been married. Like I had to have been, or at least close to, that period of late 90s, kind of when they'd first be kind of available other than at Casey's. Right. Table or whatever. So, but it wasn't Casey that had them. It was somebody else, but I was just like, wow, that's cool. And then, this year seeing one in the wild, has kind of come full circle, but that same just fascination and awe, or seeing them hatch out at my own house or, those kind of things. It's still very cool, but I think, there's something about that first viewing or first time we see something or hear about something and you're just like, what is that? It's really a cool feeling. Fun stuff. And there's a lot of different species out there,
Absolutely.
It's a big wide world. I don't know why we get stuck on monoculture, but anyway, good times. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one, which was with Zach Loafman. Speaking of Klubrid and Klubroid Radio, and he was talking about scientific strength in the hobby. Do we do things that contribute to science and what kind of, are we doing things the right way, I guess? And, I think there's definitely either side of the coin on that one too. There's definitely things that we don't do great or we have. I always like to think about the, what do we call them? We've done it for years because somebody did it back in the late 90s and, it just stuck, and that's what you do. And nobody tests it or tries anything different or, I guess the chameleon, husbandry, paradigm shift that we had with, the recent, interview on Chameleon Academy podcast with Peter Nackis and, crazy. Just those kind of things.
I mean, it brings a couple prompts to my mind, right? The first is I've been rereading Caulfield's 1969, The Keeper and the Kept. So Snakes and Snake Hunting was focused on, snake hunting stories. This one is, there's some of that. But there's also sort of fundamental components of trying to keep snakes alive, although notably, right, this is a period in time before people were regularly producing snakes in captivity, before they were even, kind of is skeptical of the idea of being able to successfully brumate animals by keeping them between the 50s and 60s. But other than that, I would say that taken on the whole, reading through the sort of first, second, third chapter, as he's kind of walking through ideas of keeping snakes, and I would say too, some of the feeding ideas and things there's definitely been movement on. But I looked at it and said, in general, something that, again, so what that puts us at 56 years now, published 56 years ago. Fundamentally, it's a lot of the same stuff that I believe, the technique and stuff that I believe is true today. I think there's clearly we have so many more tools and things that it makes things seem more possible, right? There's kind of a fear written in the language of saying, okay, it works with boa constrictors, but is kind of leery of doing it with X, Y, and Z, and those sorts of things. And I'm sure that's working with solely wild caught animals, that maybe you collected, maybe someone else collected. Maybe they took a month on a train to get to you, whatever it is, right? There's a ton of confounding factors, but in general, I read it and say, yeah, I agree. This is how I believe in keeping snakes. He talks in there about, the ideal cage size for a 5 or 6 foot Boyd is, his mind is 3 foot by 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot, because this, just based on their physiology, how it keeps, they do better with, in that tighter confines and things. And I'm just reading it going, there you go. I totally agree. That's the same cage size that I like for that size snake that you're describing, And obviously there's a bias to recognize in there, in that, like, I read that book when I was 10 or 11 years old, foundational time for me keeping snakes, even though it had been out for, 30 or 40 years or whatever at the time, is like, maybe that is partially, I've come to this point based on that,
based on what you read.
Block or whatever. Or it's just saying, after all this time,
just bears true.
See things the same way. There's truth to it.
Right.
Just super interesting, right? And that is all born out of the, there's a lot of scientific knowledge that both was reflected in and pushed forward by sort of the approaches that are described there. So I think it's germane, not totally off in left field here. And I mean, so much of it, both in the book and generally, right, is anecdotal evidence. We just had a conversation with Ben where there was so much interesting. I thought there was a ton of great stuff, in that show. Folks hopefully will have heard it by now. It hasn't gone out yet when we're having this conversation, but all of that, for the most part, until sort of Ben is looking under the hood, so to speak, is a lot of anecdotal evidence. It's what's our observation based on what we can see, and a lot of that, up until more recently, where just ball pythons and looking under the hood has been more plausible, that's facilitated what they're doing, facilitated what Ben is doing, is, really looking at things and saying, okay, are things simpler, or are they more complex, right? What is all this anecdotal evidence taken as true points in this direction? Is that even possible? Do we understand that within these vertebrates? Has this ever been looked at by a researcher? And, for the most part, the answer to those things is no. So at least that anecdotal evidence can lead to, hey, let's actually validate or refute whatever this anecdote is, right? At some point, someone maybe will do that with my rhino temp sexing thing, and say, wow, either, as I say, support or refute. Wow, this is something we didn't even realize was in this lineage of animals. What you had mentioned, you were talking about the Asper egg, kind of fit into this same box. That I'm curious, both your anecdotal experience to this point and, kind of how it goes. I had heard made mention that in general, Nephurus species generally lay 2 eggs, and most of the keepers that I've heard discuss it talk about, in general, those wind up being a male and a female. And I'm curious if you've either seen that, heard the same thing. It just kind of fit into that same box. And that may well potentially be. And then the question becomes, is that a reflection of 50-50 odds? Probably not. My inference would be, if that holds true and there's validity to that across multiple different keepers and species and incubation methods and all these things, that genuinely you're seeing that sort of division. Well, that's actually not what we usually see in terms of 50-50 ratios, right? In terms of how the odds play out, it would be more likely that you would see a variance that comes to an average, as opposed to saying, pretty much every clutch, it's a male and a female.
That's hard to say, and I'm not the one to answer that because I haven't been as successful as some on producing Nephurus. But I think those anecdotal observations are what start us down the track, or should, I guess, if we have the means and the patience.
It's just an interesting idea that it's like, okay, taken as true. To me, that suggests it's at least intriguing to say, is there something more happening? Because that's not how we would expect a normal data set to distribute, right?
Right.
So and what would that mechanism even be? I have no idea. That's where we need someone who's an expert in such things to say, hopefully it's a prompt. An anecdote could become a prompt to an expert to say, well, what would that have to look like? What could that potentially look like? Can we explore it? And hopefully the answer at some point is there's a nexus of all those things that says, yeah, let's check it out.
Right. And I think that's kind of what Zach does really well with his zoo, studies or Zeus. Yeah. And he's, taking those anecdotal observations and making a student project out of it, for these students. And so, yeah, incidentally, Casey Cannon just finished his master's there. So kind of cool.
Yet another different project. So I'm glad this one turned out for him and all. This one was what? This was crocodilians or something?
Yeah, like gharials or something, like at a zoo or
Very cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
Neat stuff. So I think that's it's easier, I think, to just say, oh, that's how we do it and just do it the same way. And you'll probably have success, but I think we can improve things or make them better. If you just say, oh yeah, diamond pythons die when they're 5 years old, or you say, wait, what are we doing wrong? How do we keep diamond pythons from dying when they're 5 years old? Oh, they're temperate. We got to keep them cooler than their counterparts in the tropics, or even, up a couple cities north. So, it's asking those questions and trying to, or like Peter Knack is saying, I've never seen a chameleon drink. Why is that? I've seen them do everything else. Maybe they do it a different way, and sitting and watching a chameleon overnight,
weighing them, actually trying. I mean, and the other part of it, I guess maybe speaking to the potential utility of herpetoculture in terms of making advancements is just our time and capacity to provide stimuli to our captives and see how they respond, and hopefully take that in, and we can create ideas that folks who are just observing in the field or are limited to field observations or view the world solely through that lens. Right. They never have those experiences to even, let alone have the animal to look at and kind of see how it responds to those stimuli and things. There are plenty of, even I think Rick Shine has made mention of this. I know Andy Holycross made mention of this, just in terms of saying, like, their expertise is not keeping snakes alive in boxes. Yeah, right. And so, that's sort of a gap in their knowledge. They have so much knowledge that we don't have, right? Right. But if there's some prompts that can come from the observational time and the ability to induce behaviors that you can't induce in the wild, maybe those can be prompts for the people, that expertise to come into play and validate it, or,
Right. And I think too, we might be positioned with all these offspring to have, statistically, have enough statistical power to make a claim from, if we take 20 snakes and do this with them and 20 snakes and do that with them and see what the outcome is, if you have something measurable, like, okay, I had a study that I started doing, but kind of petered out or fizzled out when I, with my time or something, but I was feeding half the offspring like tails, and the other half I was feeding like a mouse drumstick, and just, seeing the growth comparisons over time. And I should have kept with it, but I kind of went the way, but, seeing those kind of things and quantifying them can be very valuable and helpful to others and yourself, and what would be better to try, or, there's other commercially available things like the Reptilinks or like the Predator meal replacement stuff, that kind of thing. You could do a really cool study just getting your offspring to feed, and getting them ready to sell. I guess the downside is you'd have to keep them long enough to get your conclusion, or get enough data to say something, but yeah, there's a lot of fun things that could be done. I was talking to Ben for a while about, selecting mice with better characteristics for producing, snake food, basically. And, some of the things that we could do to try to improve different aspects of rodent breeding and, bigger, stronger, more robust, that need less food, that kind of stuff, or, that aren't going to all die if their water leaks out or something, or ones that can swim if their tub floods. No, that's a joke, but things like that, improving and tracking that molecularly, or having a certain breeding scheme to improve that hybrid vigor, that kind of thing. Kind of crazy. Yeah. They've done a study. It's called the collaborative cross. It's really an interesting thing. It's mainly for, research models, but they've taken like all these different strains of mice and mixed them all together in a reliable manner where they've, known the genetics of the breeding pair or whatever. And so they can say, okay, there's this much of this strain in them, that kind of thing. It's really kind of an interesting thing and very complicated and difficult to track, but they've found a way to do that.
It was worth their while to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then they'll take them and say, infect them with a different virus, and they'll see kind of the outcome. And then they'll try to track that back to different traits associated with different mouse strains, and really fascinating. Some of the results they're getting, completely different results in different mouse strains.
Really?
So yeah, kind of incredible. So the idea was to make better models of human disease and things like that. And so, yeah, kind of a very cool project, but there's so many things that are unknown and that would, we could potentially benefit from. It just takes somebody, ingenuitive enough to tackle a project like that and answer some of these questions. Yeah, cool stuff. All right, well, we covered that one. Do we want to move on to the next one?
Yeah.
The next one, we had some very special guests, the Podfather and the Mackin-Wookie. Eric and Owen joined us to talk about if it's good to get a morph with a rare species that is less commonly bred. You'll see like an albino white lip or
right. Or albino Omalherapipe, any of the scrubs and stuff. And,
I think it was like, well, what happens if you get like a leucistic Boelen's python?
Right.
Yeah, would that make it a good thing or a bad thing? And I guess you cannot see the obvious, like morphs tend to muddy the waters or whatever, especially if there's a lot of closely related species or subspecies, right, like reticulated pythons, where you get one morph and then all of a sudden every retic is bred to that to produce the morph. The morph becomes the main goal, and you lose the diversity of all the species and subspecies that may not have even been described yet. But now you just have a mix up of all the different things in the goal of making the morph, and of course everything is lost, right? Some might have you believe that, but and I think we've seen that happen where all of a sudden these pure locality animals pop up because somebody didn't care about that and they just did what they wanted to do and enjoyed their giant reticulated pythons from, some Sumatra or something. Is that where they come from? But
one of the places.
Yeah, exactly.
Sulawesi are the really big ones.
That's the ones I was thinking. Sulawesi, yeah. It was an S name.
Yeah.
But that.
How many could there be?
Right. How many islands have retics on them? I'm sure it can't be that many. 4, 5?
Oh, goodness.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's definitely challenges associated with morphs, especially if it's in a rare species where, there may not be that many captive bred individuals, but then all of a sudden they're going to all be used just to make some morph. That's kind of the danger, I guess. But morphs also get people into the breeding of those species that might not have otherwise jumped in, and maybe they, find a way to breed them better or, that kind of thing. So I think there can definitely be some pros to that as well. But I don't know, maybe largely cons in my mind, but what do you think? Any other thoughts on that?
No, I'm pretty aligned. I think you hit most of it there. Kind of from my perspective, it might cultivate additional interest, and if that leads to success, that's great. It probably also, that's sort of the countervailing factor, is it's probably that increased interest might raise the price, which we've talked about a lot in a lot of different contexts of saying, I do think a downside with sort of the morphs and even lineage and those sorts of things, I don't know that it reflects sort of the universal experience of snakes in the wild. So that I do think our insistence on being able to tell someone that these are the exact, mostly, right, the sire is what would be at issue. These are the exact parents of this particular animal, I do think has led to us having fewer animals about which to say it. Right. In the sense that I think we see a lot, the kind of females within their environment, there are a lot of males generally pursuing them. Mm-hmm. And that, we've certainly seen sort of multiple paternity and things that have only been evidenced based on the genetic mutations that make it clear in a way that otherwise wouldn't, right? But the Solomon Island tree boa experience of seeing, so that's a species where the males don't fight one another. Instead, I put I think 4 males in with a single female, and a big part of their struggle, I think, so there's a large degree of sexual dimorphism between males and females. The males are really small, and I think they're actually stratified within their environment. We've talked about this with the what is it, Fraser Island, or it's a different carpet, right? Where males are eating one thing, kind of juveniles, and males
niche partitioning.
Exactly right. And so certainly the Solomon Island tree boas have that, and in those species, right, the males generally don't fight one another because they haven't been induced to select for the characteristics that would promote success there.
They need to save their energy to try to tackle that giant female.
Exactly right. And so the experience of putting in 4 males, not all 4 tried to breed, tried to stimulate the female at once. In fact, one started, and the other 3 were just kind of sitting there. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, because he's putting in all this, where boas are notorious for this anyway, he's putting in all this work, and he sort of is losing his vigor and starts to fall off. And then a second one replaces him and starts, replicating the effort that he was putting in. And now he is with the first, now he is joining the first 2 that were still just sitting to the side. And it just progressed in that fashion, that it was sort of this sort of communal effort, and that there's more of an advantage for that species in that environmental context than there is for a singular male to be the sire of all these offspring. And so I just feel like there are times where we see it with garter snakes, right, where you have these literal breeding balls and things.
Oh man, those poor females.
Exactly right. So when in captivity, it's an insistence on saying, no, Justin will only buy X, Y, and Z from me if I can show him, the pictures of the parent, definitive pictures of the parents, so he can, put that into his own marketing campaign down the road or whatever it is. Which, again, I think is cool, but I do think it means we have less snakes about which to be making lineage charts. Sure.
Yeah, that's, I guess the challenge, is if you, especially in the context of morphs, if you have one morph, you're going to want to spread that male across as many females as possible, and then you might have lower success rate because, there was a lot of chatter on the NPR group about multiple sires and using many males, and things like that. So, and I think it's definitely a strategy employed by a lot of species in the wild, the obvious ones being those giant mating balls of garter snakes in Canada or whatever. I was watching that the other day, the poor females are trying to climb up the cliff to try to knock off as many males as they can. And they're just one focus on them. But I think that would be rough being a female garter snake. Well, and I guess that does kind of go with the one we'll talk about in a couple of episodes is this lineage matter. We'll touch on that again in a minute here, but cool stuff. let's see. We did the next one live in Arizona.
Live on remote. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always fun to have the breaks. Oh, we got to stop and look at this animal on the road or whatever. So yeah, that was
another toad. There's another toad.
Yeah. Chuck and I were herping with Steve and Dustin out in Arizona, and had a great trip. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and had some good conversations about conventional herp wisdom, herping on a full moon, don't do it, or that kind of thing. And I guess who was it that was talking about West Texas on NPR, and they were hanging out at the Airbnb or whatever, and like it was kind of a crappy night, not the weather wasn't great. And so they're like, yeah, I think we're just going to hang out here. And he's like, well, we're here. We might as well go, you're not going to find anything you're not looking for. And went out and found a gray band, it's like, or two or something. I can't remember what, the exact story, but it was like, if you're just saying, oh, the temperature's this, I'm not going to find anything. And I probably had more than one or two of those experiences where I know one was we were looking for jungle carpets in northern Queensland, and I had just made the statement like, it's probably cold. It's too cold and rainy. We're not going to see any pythons. And then we turn a corner and there's a python, in the middle of the road. It's like instant eating my words of we're not going to see one. And then I see my first wild jungle carpet, it was pretty cool. So, I think if you have that attitude of like, oh, we have everything figured out, snakes never come out on a full moon. Well, not every, species follows that rule. There are actually some geckos that are, that come out during a full moon as a strategy to avoid others that are avoiding predators, and they're also predatory geckos that prey on these smaller ones, but the smaller ones come out because the owls aren't going after them because they're too small to bother with or whatever. So, there might be a strategy to come out on a full moon. And I think same kind of thing, like I wouldn't have thought you'd find a bunch of green tree pythons in the middle of the winter in, far north Queensland. And some of the Aussies went out there in June and found, 20 or 30 of them or whatever. 20, yeah. Ridiculous numbers of green tree
Probably
pythons.
Easier to see when the foliage is less verdant, right?
Right. So. And there's probably many different reasons for different things like that. And maybe that's all you're going to see is green tree pythons. Maybe, all the monitors are, maybe too cold or down or something. So, I think there's definitely trade-offs, but I think also, if you're flying across the ocean, you want to give yourself the best chance of seeing a lot of things rather than just, going over for one thing. So, a lot of things play into that, of course, but sure. I would say if you're, just looking locally and, figure it out, like see during all times of the year, you might find some really cool stuff. Another thing that comes to mind is the time when I was in California and saw like 30 patch nose snakes or whatever in the night. Leaf nose snakes, not patch nose. Yeah. Leaf nose snakes. And then on 3 or 4 subsequent trips, didn't see any. It's like, wait a second, why did I see so many that trip? And then none, the next couple trips. And then actually this last time I was in California for the reptile talks, I saw, 3 or 4 on the road on that trip. So they were back out and in somewhat full force, although these were all juveniles and the ones I'd seen before were mostly larger. So kind of an interesting thing to think about,
And the funny thing is in the Right and Right Handbook of Snakes, in the leaf nose section, and so that one of the cool things, right, and I know I've talked about it before, but in that book is it has specific sort of anecdotes, field observations and anecdotes with particular years of those observations and things. Right. I believe that the original or the discussion on leaf nose snakes in Southern California talks about they're at times locally abundant and at other times entirely absent.
Yeah.
So that it, literally for 100 years, people have seen the same thing, where sometimes they're going and they're everywhere, and other times you can't find a one.
Exactly. And, some like when we were out there looking for, we were hoping to see sidewinders, which were almost like a guaranteed species out there. And then we didn't see any, granted we didn't spend too much time in the area, but it was still like, oh yeah, we should see plenty of sidewinders. And then you don't see any. It's like the conditions seem
when you
perfect.
Got one night,
that's true. So it could be, and there was a guy that was there just before us and he saw one. So, probably just scared that one off the road. And
in that spot, you would expect more than the one that he scared off the road or whatever.
Exactly. But, especially when we were tripping over him on that one trip where I almost literally tripped on one. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's another, I guess, if you think you've figured it all out, and sometimes I think there is some conventional wisdom that's going to save you some pain and anguish. Like obviously, like I said, you want to give yourself the best chance, and so you're going to do as much research as you can to find. But it was kind of like, I guess it depends on what you're looking for too. Because my first trip, I went to Central Australia in October, and I thought, oh, that's the best month to be there, and we saw a lot of great stuff, and it just happened to be the wettest year on record. But I was talking to Rex Neindorf at the Alice Springs Reptile Park, and he's like, "Oh man, you should come here in December. That's the best time. You just tripping over geckos. There's AMA everywhere. That kind of thing." And you're like, "Okay, but I'm here now. Help me out with
we got to make it
here and now." Yeah. So, and when you're planning a trip, we say this a lot. You're planning a trip 6 months in advance, you're not going to know what the conditions are going to be. And when I got to Australia on this last trip in March, I was like, this is way hotter than I anticipated. It was about 10, 15 degrees hotter than it typically is in this time of year. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh man, our whole, trip is going to be ruined because of this, but
and it still turned out great.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think anything's a guarantee of seeing stuff or not seeing stuff, Yeah, if I went on my first trip that trip to California where I saw the leaf noses, then I would have been like, oh yeah, leaf noses are easy. You'll see leaf noses, no problem. But then if it weren't for the next 4 trips, I'd be like, okay, maybe leaf noses are locally abundant at certain times of the year. And I don't know what the conditions for that are, because I was there around the same time, same months. And so it's just kind of things we don't understand, but my friend Pat May and Rye Jones, they went out and found like 7 ringneck snakes in Utah in a weekend or something. It's like, that is unheard of. That is, and even they admit like, this is ridiculous. I would have never have expected this, and they found a bunch of other, milk snakes and things like that. It was just like some crazy, all the planets are aligned. Yeah. Some unknown thing that just brought all these things out. It's like, if I could replicate that, and you knew, okay, if I'm going out on this day, I'm going to see, a couple ringnecks. I'd be like, hey, that makes it easy, Yeah. It's that kind of unknown uncertainty that makes it a little, and, I think as you get more experience and do it more often, you're going to have more of that where, like, yeah, I can reliably predict that I'll probably find this in this area at this time, Yeah. I think that's what makes a good herper, I guess, is having that knowledge, but also having the knowledge that I could still not see it because it's, a lot of luck and timing. And, if you put yourself out there enough, you're probably going to see a lot more than if you don't. So yeah, it's kind of a tricky thing. And if you live in the vicinity of a certain thing, you're going to probably see them more frequently than if you're not in that area a lot, if you're just going once every twice a year or something. So yeah, that's the trick, I guess. Yeah. Well, anything else to add to that? I know you like the shoulder seasons,
Yeah. I mean, no, I think you hit it there relative to my perspective too. And it's basically, I think it falls into the box of things where you can't make definitively good decisions. You can do things that should probably help you. You can do research and have ideas to increase your chances, but you certainly can't guarantee a good outcome. We have plenty of proof of that.
Yeah.
And, not least that if you're planning that out 6-9 months in advance, depends how far it is and all those things, and your willingness to audible. right? I know Jordan, right? When he was just in West Texas, or when he talks about going to West Texas, he's saying that he essentially doesn't make a plan at all. He wants to fly bespoke based on conditions and how he's feeling about it, and maybe lack of crowds and all these different things. Yeah. It's probably not, he's so comfortable having gone there for decades that it makes sense for him to do that. If he, if he doesn't have that experience, and sometimes you can misjudge your own experience on that, right? Like the second time in Kakadu, and I'm going, I think I got a good feeling, but there were still unknowns,
Sure.
It's on fire. This is doing whatever. But I've certainly felt that myself, even just going up based on going a second time, let alone decades. So I think that can make a lot of sense. Obviously some of it is, how are you, where are you staying? What's the plan relative to that? Are you just camping where you fall, or are you trying to center out of a particular spot? Do you have other obligations that you're trying to meet simultaneously? Sometimes on your trips that happens. So, certainly those are all factors, right? Sometimes, the conference that they bought your ticket to go to, speak at is going to be on X date. You could either go have your kind of fun bit on the
front end.
It wasn't fun, but you're resigned to the front of the back, right? But you can try and avoid making poor choices. And I think that's really the extent of what you can do, try and be informed to do that. And if all things being equal, to me, I'd rather plan around sort of, shoulder season in the same way that, full into new. And, the trick with that is always, it's not only the illumination, it's the sunrise and sunset times vary throughout the course of the monthly lunar cycle. So that between full and new, it basically is only up during the daytime. Right. So that it's not even a function of illumination. It's the thing's not even in the sky. Yeah. And that's the part that, where we've certainly been in spots where we're going, it's very dark, and that's cool in its own way too. It's its own sort of full immersion in the experience, right? We're at Kakadu, hanging out on the escarpment and it's complete black. And it always reminds me of the, idea from a kid. I'm going, man, all the constellations and things. Oh man, people must have these vivid memories to kind of create, that those three dots turn into whatever it is. Right. And then it's only, later in life being, away from light pollution to say like, oh, they're not quite as creative as I thought. There's
a lot more to this.
There's a lot more to this that you otherwise can't see, right? And Phil with his phones taking pictures of the Milky Way, which is totally wild in more ways than one. But we're in West Texas and he's just click, and then it's that's truly
fantastic. Wild. Yeah, so cool. And I think that's what we need to retain. You see maybe people who are doing YouTube videos kind of for a living, and they're going to places, it's just this or another garbage snake, and they're just kind of losing that wonder of seeing these things in the wild. And I guess when you've seen your 500th Western Diamondback, you maybe get a little less excited than your first, but I would hope that we'd keep that sense of wonder and that sense of excitement, even if it's your 50th,
I still remember seeing my first one, and you were there, I do, and that was not, as plenty of people were happy to tell us, that wasn't a particularly beautiful one, but it was beautiful to me,
I still remember my first. It was on a trip down to Tucson, and we were just like, I think we were making our way down to Mexico for a family trip, and we stopped in Tucson to eat or something. I'm like begging, can we please just walk up this wash? I want to see. And there was a Western Diamondback coiled up at the edge of the bank, right where you'd expect to maybe see him, and what I was hoping to see. And I'm like, we saw one. It's kind of cool. So it's just luck of the draw sometimes, but I don't know. It's exciting. It's still exciting, like seeing anything, even the Great Basins that are around here, and they're very common, but I see one, I get excited just still as fun. Much as the last one, obviously you can't necessarily recreate the initial moment, but to appreciate them, even if they're common as whatever, that's a gift that keeps on giving if you can maintain that excitement. Yeah. So, all right. Well, always fun to herp and chat with folks. I think that's one of the best parts of herp trips, or visiting with people while you're not finding things, putting in the miles or whatever. All right. Next one's Keeping Giant Snakes with Bill Bradley. And obviously we kind of hit on a little bit of that, talking about retics and I don't know. I mean, I've always I think everybody kind of that appreciates snakes is especially in awe of those giant snakes, and I don't know. I see a lot of those, who's the Yoink guy on YouTube that he's Fishing Garrett or something like that.
Okay.
He did a trip over to Australia too. He does some kind of funny, Yoink videos where he's like, oh, here's a Burmese python in the Everglades, yoink, and he pulls it, picks it up or whatever behind that. But he's I think he's one of the python hunters in the Everglades, and he's removing, he'll have videos of like finding nests of Burmese pythons, and stuff like that. And we saw a DOR Burmese when I was down there years ago, like for a conference back in the early 2000s, and saw a couple DOR Burmese pythons, and it was like, whoa, there's a python in America kind of thing. It was kind of crazy, but I think just giant snakes have that appeal to see them in the wild. Cool. Yeah, seeing a big old scrub or an olive python in Australia was pretty amazing. As much as I like Antaresia, I'd still get very excited.
Big pythons in the wild.
Exactly. Yeah. I'd much rather see him in the wild than try to cram him into a box in my reptile room. So I think that's kind of the main thing is just don't get into it if you can't house a 16 to 20 foot snake.
And even just dealing with, that's a whole different thing, right?
Safety issues and need a big shovel to scoop that poop out.
Yeah, bring a shovel.
And some species, they may not even need to be giants. They can still fill up a small area with a lot of urine and whatever feces. So that's not fun. So big snakes equal big messes sometimes, or big food items. Sourcing expensive. Expensive. The size of their enclosure and the size of their food and just everything is more expensive for those giant snakes. So, and I don't fault anybody for doing it. Just make sure you do it the right way. And you don't think, well, by the time it's 15 feet, I'll be able to have a room size enclosure for it or something. If you don't have the means right now, you're probably not gonna have the means then. And those snakes grow very fast. Like that's their evolutionary, mechanism of strategy.
As big as they possibly can. Yeah.
And they grow very quickly and they get big very quickly. And I think that was something interesting in the Rick Shine book, the one that I'm reading now. The name escapes me, of course, but we've talked about Snakes Without Borders. We've talked about on 2 other shows, and I continue to forget the name of it. But Snakes Without Borders talks about his work with reticulated pythons. Really fascinating that they found that, even the skin industry where they're collecting them, on a daily, weekly basis, whatever, they still maintain healthy populations. And that the younger, males or whatever would be the ones that were most commonly encountered in the cities and towns where they were being collected. And whereas the giant females that were having babies were out in the bush a little deeper and harder to find. So kind of cool, interesting thing to read about and figure out. But that plays into their difficulty in captivity. They grow fast. They need a big cage pretty quickly after you purchase them as a juvenile.
They eat big things.
Yep. And they can pose a danger to life.
Absolutely.
Or even if you don't die, I was talking to a guy that worked one of the big shops in California, and he where they breed a lot of retics, and he got bit by a male that was in breeding mode, and it grabbed him on the bicep and just ripped, and it cut one of his arteries in his arm, and he was just dumping buckets of blood. They're trying to put pressure on it, get him to the emergency room. And he came very close to bleeding out from a retic bite, and normally these animals were very calm and, not typically ones that he was worried about a bite from. But during that time of year, they were being aggressive. Maybe the male smelled another male on him and decided it was time to combat, So yeah, like even when you think, oh, it's my pet, he's calm. Yeah. I know this snake. Things can change, depending on what's going on in the background. And so, yeah, I need to be aware of that. That's I'm not saying they shouldn't be kept, but I'm also saying if you're going to do it right.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. The next show was kind of more of a trip recap with, again, myself, Chuck. I think it was just me and Chuck, or did we have Dustin with Steve on as well? You guys talking. Yeah. So just recounting what we saw, what we did. I think still the kind of the crazy story there was getting up in the morning, seeing that green rat on our drive out from where we saw it, and then Dustin coming back a few days later and finding one same time, in the same spot, basically. So, kind of crazy how that can work. And, just, how trips, even I think we were there the week before or 2 weeks before. And then, I went back for that quick trip and saw stuff that, the twin spots, and we saw 2 twin spots and I think part of that was probably having Steve there where he'd found twin spots before in different spots. And so he kind of said, hey, check over in this area. Did he give you guys
some insight into that?
Yeah. Yeah. He was the one that kind of led us to that other area.
To the right track.
Yeah. Where we didn't necessarily intuitively get that,
Right.
But
not what you hear about.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. A little different or paradigm shift or something. So, pretty cool though. And absolutely. Just, anytime you're herping with buddies, it's a good time. So yeah. The next one, we had a double guest on this time again with, Phil Wolf and Billy Hunt, and they had a topic they wanted to fight about. So I think, that was fun to have them on, but, they were talking about, does lineage matter? And I think we hit a little bit on that earlier. Any other thoughts on lineage and if it's important?
No, I think I pretty much said my piece. I think it's really cool. Mm-hmm. I think it's a cool idea. I think the idea, particularly from the chondro community of, oh, wow, look, there aren't necessarily, as we'd hope, photos with each thing or whatever. But I do think the sort of history and visual of like this animal connects to the, Sedgwick County first animals that were hatched in the U.S. or whatever. That's intrinsically to me really neat. I like that.
Right.
Simultaneously, I just think it's true that with our focus on needing it to be the pairing of these 2 animals, I just think it produces fewer offspring because I think some of what we're missing is the ability to utilize multiple males, kind of, this one isn't working, but not be hesitant to switch, or to introduce multiple males simultaneously.
Right.
In terms of scrub pythons, bolins, these sorts of things. I think, yes, there's risk, but I think that's also part of it. Right. And the other thing I wanted to say, kind of, I guess it goes more to that previous conversation when we're talking about morphs, is saying my concern was that the price will go up. So it's harder to have a big group to be working with. Because I think as much as the ability to pair multiple animals, it's really also about just having the ability to have a collection that really gives you a shot to do that.
Right. Yeah. And that can be difficult, and it can kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have if this is something that's priced too high for the average keeper to get, and then of course they're going to be more rare because less people breed them, and then you can't afford to get a group, and so you're going to have less chance. Especially, it seems very important within the bull and eye context that you need multiple males, and and we often, I think, as a product of the ball python craze, is we think of 1.5 or something. You're spreading a male with some weird genetics across several different females, and I think that also kind of adds to that in some way. But Also, the morphs kind of have shown us, like we talked about with Ben, that multiple paternity is possible, and that you can get several sires in on a clutch and see different results, even to the point where only the males genetics are passed along. Yeah, crazy.
Hopefully people picked up on that. Yeah, I had never heard of that.
No, it's, I guess Nick had talked a little bit about it before, but I think until Ben kind of described it, I didn't quite grasp it or something. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I heard it, but did not understand it until Ben explained
and Ben did a great job explaining a lot of cool genetic anomalies or inheritance methods. So that was cool. All right, is published data infallible? This was me and Chuck, and probably in light of the Antaresia paper or something, where it's like, do we have to agree with published papers? And it seems like for the most part, especially in Australia, if there's a new publication about taxonomy, they jump on board real quick, especially if it's published by an Australian. Sorry, guys, but it seems to be the case. But yeah, the children's versus Stimson's pythons, I think there's still a few that are kind of hesitant or don't use the children's python for Stimson's python, especially like Western Stims. But you see a lot of people adopting that and carrying it out. And yeah, it's frustrating, but what you going to do? I guess prove them wrong. And, I'm not a taxonomist, so that might be harder for me to do. And maybe I'm wrong. So I'll fully admit that. But, I know enough, I guess, to be dangerous, but I'm not a taxonomist by any stretch. So I don't know that much. So I can fully admit that there's probably something that they know that I don't, and maybe they're onto something and maybe they're right. So, but,
okay.
I don't think.
That's very magnanimous of you. I would say that my perspective is that certainly I'm not a taxonomist, and there are plenty of, you could fill a library with things that I don't know. Absolutely. Simultaneously, maybe from the legal training background, I would say that essentially all of these scientific articles, everything everyone's putting out is trying to make an argument. Right? And they're trying to give you the justification for their argument. And depending on the source and the peer review process and all those things, those things either give credence to or detract the credit from the credibility of the argument that they're making, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically it. So that you could read something and say, well, my experience and opinion makes it so that I don't find your argument persuasive. And that's literally it. And you could wind up being, the lone voice that's standing out there, in which case, well, you're probably wrong, And then, but like you mentioned with the Antaresia paper, other papers jump to mind. If in fact it's like 50-50 uptake, I would say that if we're in the context of scholarly writing, and that the informed audience that's taking it in, and you're only getting like 50-60% buy-in from the audience that takes that in, it suggests that at a minimum the paper probably needed more work in terms of expressing either just its justification or its expression of what it was trying to say. If informed audience isn't being persuaded, then what usually happens in science is someone follows it up, either pushing that same argument further or presenting sort of the counters and suggesting an alternative, whatever it looks like. But yeah, to me, it's so relative. Is it infallible? Published data we know isn't infallible because of the academic fraud that we've seen associated with data manipulation, particularly I would say in the softer sciences for sure. It's a little bit less common, I think, in your stuff, but and we see that just in the context of, well, this raises suspicions because it doesn't. What I was mentioning earlier, right, with Nephurus, if genuinely we're getting anecdotal records of 2 eggs and a higher than anticipated percentage of them winds up being a genetic pair, that's just not what data distributions look like. So, in the same way, it's an indicia of falsified data if the spread and variance in data doesn't look like a normal distribution. So infallible? No, we certainly not universally. We know that. That's been proven. But I think the context here, as you say, is mostly about a paper comes out, do I have to buy it? And the answer is, if you're looking at it with a fair and open mind and you're an informed reader, whatever that means, whatever the background required for that is, because there's plenty of stuff where I'm reading the paper and I don't understand sort of the methodologies they reference it when super in-depth genetic stuff where it's, I have to go look up a dozen things to even try and figure out what it is they're saying. I'm certainly not going to be the one pushing hard against that paper.
Sure.
It's more likely I better hope that I'm only pushing back on papers that I fully understand and just say, no, it even says in the paper that I can disagree. They said, we think there's
they give several options
for A, B, or C. You know, we choose A because our inherent bias is whatever it is.
Right.
Well, my inherent bias is B. And you said I could choose B if that was my inherent bias.
Exactly. That's the beauty of science is you don't have to agree, you know, if you have a compelling reason to think of something else, you know, and you know, I think at least historically, it seems like a lot of gene jockeys that are looking at genetics, you know, they may not even see a live animal or hold it in their hands or see it in the wild or appreciate the nuances. Yeah,
exactly.
And if you're just looking at the genes, you could probably make an argument for just about anything you wanted. But, you know, and so I think we've come a long way in that regard where we don't just have one thing that specifies whether it's a species or not, or, you know, that kind of thing. So, and in the fact that we're developing new, I mean, there's lots of different species concepts. You know, so
which is somewhat new in itself, right? An expansion in the last 30 or 40 years, as opposed to having just sort of a singular or a couple competing theories. Now, there's so many different things where we could even be talking about something that's much more closely related. But the whole idea of being on an independent path and what that looks like in an area of climate change and all these different things it's interesting. And then that's before you get into the, as I say, more the dogmatic paradigms of saying, well, I just don't believe in subspecies as an entity. Either it's a species or it's nothing. You know, versus someone who, you know, birders with their, you know, 80 to hundreds of subspecies per species or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a fun thing to think about. And I guess maybe taxonomy is an easy target, you know, because we have a lot of strong feelings in certain, you know, especially species we love and think about a lot, you know, that kind of thing. So it's hard to
favorites.
Right. Yeah.
And I forget the exact term for it too, right? But there are other things, there are certain, I guess is, you know, a function of the variance, but I'm thinking of like the genera that have just a ton of species, right? That probably aren't being described or discussed or plotted in the same way as things that, you know, if a genera in general has 1 to 5 species assigned to it, the structure and plotting of that is probably different than Anolis or Varanus, where we're talking about dozens to Anolis, it's hundreds of different species. Right? The answer is probably just that represents a fundamentally different method of plotting.
Sure.
You wouldn't instead have, you know, Anolis is probably viewed by someone that views things as a genera should have 1 to 10 species. Well, that implies that there should be, you know, teens to dozens of genera come out of Anolis. So. Yeah,
and that's probably a fair argument. I mean, we see that with other big genera like Bufo, you know, where they went, oh no, you know, the European Bufo are not the same as the American Bufo, so now American is Anaxyrus. I always have a hard time saying that. Anaxyrus or something. Yeah. But you know, things like that where you know, those are warranted and probably, you know, and other groups are maybe less studied, and down the road we might have a more clear picture. And I think that's how science progresses anyway. It's like somebody challenges what the dogma is, and they say, how can there be, you know, this many species in one genus? This is ridiculous. Yeah.
Although probably like that's things so overwhelming. That's hard. That's part of the hard part, right? Is because you kind of have to treat everything comprehensively to be able to plot through all those things. Yeah. And that's a Herculean task, right? What would that even look like? Particularly when there no doubt still are sort of clusters of or experts with clusters of expertise within those different groups. And now you've got one person who's trying to make this sort of compendium. And maybe the answer is they need a dozen co-authors, right? All the different experts from these little, groupings or whatever, to kind of be providing that subsidiary feedback and try and consolidate it into a single picture. But,
Yeah. But then you have a lot of different views on how things should be done. Yeah, exactly. That could complicate things. Exactly. Yeah. I've heard of a lot of projects that have really cool information, really cool data, but they kind of got squashed because the different co-authors couldn't agree or couldn't move forward or were sitting on stuff and weren't moving, as rapidly as the other members. And it's just kind of a tragedy sometimes to hear that. But I think a great example, I was listening to Aaron Bauer give a talk, and he's a gecko taxonomist, really brilliant guy, but he was like a bad guy for a while with a lot of gecko folks because he took crested geckos out of Rhacodactylus because they were, it was a paraphily situation. Right. They just didn't fit there. And, keeping them in Rhacodactylus made for breaking the rules of taxonomy or whatever. So he had to put them in a different genus in Corolophus. And so, a lot of people were upset about that. No, they'll always be Rhacodactylus. He's like, well, not if you follow the science, and if you don't agree, then give me some more compelling reason to keep them there or whatever. So
it'll always be Burma to me, right, Peter?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's we also have to be willing to let go of our preconceived notions or our the way we think about things, and some changes probably weren't warranted. Maybe chondropython should still be a genus, and there's probably good support for that.
Thing there, the kind of
things kind of go back and forth and change over time. So, and I guess that's species in general. Just because they're something now doesn't mean they're on the not on an evolutionary trajectory, and they'll be different in 10,000 years. But by then, we probably won't care about that anymore. We have such a tiny little speck in the grand scheme of things, in our small lifetime. So. I guess I try not to get as worked up, but certain papers might stick in my craw a little longer than others. I let go. I still think that obesus should be the gene or the specific name for the
chucks.
Chuck walla. Yeah. That's just such a fitting thing. They're just obese little when they inflate with air. It's just a great fitting name. But adder, I will acknowledge adder. I'll go with adder, even though I like obesus better. All right. Well, we got do another morph. Do morphs take away appreciation of wild types? Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know why some people get excited about certain morphs. They look much worse than the wild type, or take away what makes the wild type really cool. So I don't know.
I think it's just the function of exclusivity or being different or whatever,
We like that idea of having something special, different, rare,
right.
And I think that goes hand in hand with the reptile keeping in general, because everybody's looking for the next, I think that's kind of a phase of herpetoculture is like, what's the next one? I got to get that adrenaline boost or that, whatever. So, yeah.
And whether it's to sell it or it's to say, just, show your buddies or whatever, it could be either direction. So, and often, right. And I know, we talked about this with Ben, in the conversation of snakes in boxes, and they're not even the species, and all those ideas, right? Is that even in general, it's not a preference for any random one. It's even the most beautiful wild type. So even amongst that, right, there's sort of a selection to. The good news with that,
you don't want the average.
if there's variability to it, it's going to be the not average to your perspective, which may be different from mine. And, so there's at least some more flexibility and pliability in it. It's not just, no, I get to call it 5 different things at once.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a complex issue, but I think it kind of bears out when you see, who's interested in when there's not a lot of money associated with the morph, and, who's chasing after these things after the kind of excitement's died down. Is it really because they're awesome looking or beautiful, or is it just because they're worth money, and rare? So,
right.
Yeah. I think that kind of answers it. But I don't know. It's hard to beat wild types. I just really appreciate that. I think we're on the same page there, and I probably said the same thing during that argument. But what do you do? And the last one for this installment of the Clip Show series, knowledge in the age of information. We've got everything at the tips of our fingers, which sometimes makes us think that we are knowledgeable when, I guess it's just kind of the idea of the first time keeper gets his leopard gecko, does a couple weeks of research, and now he's the expert and he's telling everybody what they're doing wrong, that kind of attitude. And that can be a challenging thing. I think it's hard because you don't want to step on the excitement that somebody has about learning something. And I think we can be a lot kinder, in dealing with folks that kind of come in with that attitude of, I'm the expert now, and, everybody listen to me or pay attention to me. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky thing. You see a lot of Dunning-Kruger syndrome in the world these days, and it's kind of scary in some ways. But information, AI has taken over, that desire. You just figure, well, AI will do it for me. They'll give me the knowledge. But I don't think that's how we gain knowledge. Yeah. I don't know. Anything to add to that?
No, I think that's fair.
Different thoughts on there.
I just think it's cool that one went up 11, 29, 22. So, man, wow. I think it just speaks to your longevity doing this. And I think it's cool that we're doing it. We're talking about it now. I think there's utility to that. And just keep the train rolling. But I think it's cool, man. Yeah.
We'll have to maybe do these a little more frequently to catch up to some extent. But
it was a fun idea.
I don't even know what show we're on. I haven't counted them up.
I know.
A lot of podcasts will number them, which is a smart thing. We just never did. And so we've got, but this makes, so that last one was number 70 if right. We're, and that, I think that's not counting some of the shows. Like we're not going to have a clip show in our clip show recap type thing, cause you don't clip show a clip show. Right? Yeah. It would just be one of those Inception moments. We'd just be a clip show within a clip show. we just get trapped, we wouldn't be able to get out. So, but yeah, definitely fun to chat about. And yeah. Anything in herpetology got you excited this week?
Yeah, as I say, most of my reading has been Keeper in the Capped. Still working through the Lost Frogs and Hot Snakes book from Marty Crump that we talked about previously. Aaron Bauer has one, so that's a sort of compendium of different stories with different themes by different herpetologists. But Aaron Bauer has one in there. Definitely a good one.
Incidentally, on the Marty Crump topic, I was over at our library, the USU library, and they had, USU authors, and she had another book in there, and it was like a little almost like a kid's book, not quite though, but like kind of shorter, but pictures. And it was, I think, was it a frog a week or something like that? It would tell a story about a frog for every week of the year or something. It was, cool. It was kind of an interesting thing. Yeah. So really neat. And I read, several of the stories while I was just kind of hanging out there for a bit, and really cool stuff. So, and then I looked her up and she had several books. So yeah, I know I have at least one more. Yeah, definitely very cool. Yeah. We ought to have her on the podcast. I agree. Get her on here. Grill some experts there. Yeah. I had talked to her husband a bit, her partner. I don't know what their situation is, but he's also a professor at Utah State and into herpetology and was willing to come on. But I don't know. It always seems like he doesn't know who I am when I pass him on campus or something, or he's late for something. It only gets more awkward when you say, "Don't you know who I am?" Look at me. Remember this face. So, and there's I still need to contact Susanna French and get her on here because, another really cool researcher at Utah State that has a lot of fun experience, researching Galapagos iguanas and all
Very
sorts
cool.
of cool stuff. So yeah, we'll have to get her on as well. But yeah, I don't know. I've been busy with the proposal, so I haven't really had much time to do much herpetologically wise. I will say I had a very similar situation with yours when I was in elementary school. The Keeper and the Kept was a book that I checked out on numerous occasions and was really geeked out by that book and had a foundational effect on me, I think. And thinking about how to keep stuff in captivity. And, I was really excited about that at that age, and build a number of cages on my own or with my dad's help, it's really a cool book. And it's really fun to think about how many things I've been able to do and how many cool reptile things I've been able to experience in my life. And hopefully there's many more to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hopefully one next month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it will be either way. And,
definitely. But if we can hit our top goal, that would be
that'd be pretty
definitely.
Okay.
We need Eric here to call the shot of we're gonna find the Owen Pelly python. Like, okay, Eric, good luck with that. I'm sure you will. We did. What the
heck? Oh my goodness. Yeah. So we'll see. But all good.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Eric and Owen, for your umbrella over us. I keep using that umbrella. It's kind of a weird thing. Stop doing that. But they're like, quit talking about the umbrella.
People can't know about the umbrella.
Thanks for all your work, Eric. We'll put it that way, especially in light of your busy schedule. But we appreciate you. You're a good friend. You're a good man. So, all right, we'll catch you later, and we'll have another episode out soon. See ya.